This is my first Instagram Live.
Awesome.
I think this is so cool. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to be able to connect with as many folks as possible in time. It's almost like you're here, but
I know,
not
right?
exactly. But good enough.
Exactly.
But good to meet you, Corbin.
Awesome. Good to meet you too. Thank you. So I wanted to start off. Could you kind of explain how you were involved during your college career, whether it be with any student organizations or events or anything, how you were involved outside of the classroom?
My involvement outside of the classroom, for the most part, was either, well, it was interesting. It was a combination of work and research. I was a research assistant when I started off my very first semester. I was cleaning little mouse cages. Was most of what I did, but I did some of the psychological testing on them. And so that took up a lot of time. I also, for a point, was a resident advisor. And so I helped to take a lot of students and get them involved in different kinds of activities, even though I wasn't that involved with one specific one. Other than, I think, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, I was in that for a while. I did a bunch of other things like that. But most of my time outside the classroom was doing some of that research. Taught me a lot, really, made me think about how I wanted to go to graduate school, because I wasn't really encouraged to do that, but that was what kind of taught me that would be an interesting and important thing to be able to do, is to do that next step, which was graduate school.
Besides, like you're saying, encouraging you to go to graduate school, how else do you think being involved affected your in-classroom education and kind of either applied what you were learning or just overall like heightened what you were learning?
It's Corbin, you said it exactly right. It like heightened my learning. What happened is that for a lot of the things that I was learning in psychology, I was doing them in the lab, or they were kind of connected, or it taught me to ask questions. Like I used to, I talk all the time now, but I used to never talk less. This arm was like broken. I never would raise my hand, but I started working in research, and it taught me to ask questions. And so all of a sudden, my arm would go up more and more and more and more and more, because I wanted to understand it. And I was really thinking through the classes that I was taking. And that engagement generalized to not only the psychology classes, to some of my other classes. And I honestly think that helped me get through. It's funny too, because I worked a lot of jobs when I was an undergraduate student to pay the bills. And I think even that made me a good worker. I mean, a couple of times when I wanted to leave a job, either because my class schedule was wrong, they really liked it because they thought I thought through my job. So there was a lot of kind of generalization to doing that research and thinking about things more deeply. And I think it developed me as a person.
So what other ways do you feel that being involved prepared you for your career? I mean, like you said, you were a research assistant and obviously you still do research. So what like specific skills do you think you learned being involved that applied directly to the workplace?
Corbin, I'm really laughing to myself because I'm thinking about the main one, which as president, I have to do a lot of public speaking. And I was arguably one of the worst public speakers known to man. I remember being asked to introduce a guest speaker when I was maybe a sophomore or junior. And I was so nervous. I'm a sweater, boy. I was just sweating, sweat's just running down me. I was stammering, I was stuttering, and I got so frustrated about my performance. I said, I'm never going to be that bad again. And so I put myself out there to, raise my hand and talk in classes, and got asked to give a presentation, and I was just willing to do it. And I really worked on something that was honestly one of my weakest things. And now I can, I give a lot of talks. I think I'm okay at it. And it was really from that very practical experience that I learned almost my frustration. And I think that was one of the takeaway messages too, was that I didn't let it define me that I didn't do well. I just said, I'm going to just do better. And I figured out ways and looked around at my environment and saw opportunities to try to do better. But I think that it's one of the ways that I think I identify with a lot of our students, is that we have to be fearless. I mean, we have to say, there's stuff that I'm not good at, and that doesn't mean you can't be good. That, you can work at it and be better. And I see that. I haven't met a lot of our students. I want to meet all 31,000. But I've seen that in them, of that, they can say that they weren't, I wasn't perfectly prepared to go to undergraduate. I wasn't perfectly prepared to go to graduate school. But it's that tenacity that we bring as rebels that makes a difference. And that's what I learned from that outside piece of it, because I kind of didn't get it from the classroom. It was a, you know, a symposium of introducing somebody. It was those other things that I think really helped me develop me.
Kind of how you touched on like that helping your position specifically as president. I kind of wanted you to talk about if you earned any leadership experience during your involvement that has helped now, or how you would recommend other students earn leadership experience in college.
People just don't believe this of me, and it's partly still true. I'm a bit of a shrinking violet. You know, if there's a corner for me to be in at the party, I would be in the corner. But I think it was putting yourself out there. You know, that one particular example, you know, I got tasked to be the speaker or to be the person who introduced, and so, you know, I took an opportunity to do that, and it taught me a lesson. But I think it was even being put in the position of that you were asked in the first place. I felt like I was just never asked to do stuff. And so you didn't even have a chance to try out a leadership skill or a speaking skill or whatever. And so that outside involvement, actually, I could just imagine I would have stayed in my dorm room the whole time. I would have, you know, been quiet and whatever, but it put me out there. It I think led me to be, I was a resident advisor for 2.5 years. In undergraduate, so that I could try to help pay my bills. And I think that that was a great experience of working with people and listening to their problems and thinking about how you can try to solve them, and just learning to listen to people. That was great practical experience of what it took for me to develop as a person.
Like what you were saying, what do you think is the importance of really applying yourself? You know, not just like, okay, I'm just going to go to class and go home.
It's a really interesting question. I think, you know, one of the things, my dad had lots of statements. It's not one that was unique to him. Said he used to say, it's hard to be an eagle when you soar with turkeys. And so I would try to actually connect myself with people that I saw were doing well. And I was wondering, how are you doing that well? You know, you're just as goofy as I am. And so I would try to connect myself, but those people also had persistence. They thought about, you know, yeah, I'm going to do bad, but I'm going to do better next time. And it's funny because we don't think about it sometimes because our friends are our friends. We don't get them for a purpose. We get them because they're our friends, but they can influence how we see and think about the world. And so that's what being connected to things outside the classroom actually helped those things inside the classroom, because some of it was just the philosophy. Some of it was, you know, to be persistent. Tell you a real quick story. When I was in graduate school, I'm thinking about this now. When I was in graduate school, I had this friend who, he was a really good friend, but he was negative about everything. He would say, "Oh yeah, well you can't do that," you know. And it wasn't done to put me down, but it was talking in a negative kind of sense. And when I went to do my qualifying exams as I was finishing up my degree, it was tough, but I kind of distanced myself from him for a little while, because I realized, as much as I enjoyed him, he put me in a certain mindset. And so, you know, he was like, "Oh, you never come and hang out anymore." I said, "Oh, don't worry, I will be. I've just got to do this other thing." And I made sure that I was just more positive and really said, I can do this if I put my mind to it. We've got to have that kind of persistence and feeling that we are good enough. And when I got done, I went back and he told me, he goes, "Boy," he goes, "whatever you did, it's changed you." He goes, "You think that you can do anything now." And I said, "Well, you know, if I don't believe it, nobody else will believe it." So there are those things that are the social things that are connected to doing things outside the classroom that I think when you're younger, you don't know how important they actually are, but they are very important. The kind of talk that we both do, self-talk, and the people that we're around, it's very important. Because if you keep telling yourself that, "Hey, I can do this. Hey, I can do this. Hey, I can do this," it's a critical piece to being successful. It won't be everything, but if you don't have that, if you think you're going to fail, you know, what's the probability that you're going to do well? It's probably that you're not going to do well.
Could you also kind of elaborate on, like you said, the importance of getting that negative energy away from you, but what do you think is the importance of finding other students who are like-minded, who have the same ideas, the same goals, and like rather be joining an RSO with them or sticking around those people?
You know, it's interesting because if you're not looking for it, you think that, well, how do you find people that are being positive? they're all around you, and you'll hear things and you'll see things that they do. You'll watch them in class. You know, you'll run into them in the library or whatever. You'll see those people. And, you know, even in the social circles that we run in, if you go to a party and you're talking to people or whatever, you'll see those people, and those are the people that you really connect with. It's funny because it's funny that you say that, Corbin, because I was thinking about, I even did it today. There's a colleague of mine who does research on something that I'm not very good at. And I was talking to him, and it was like an audition. I was talking to him and I was like, you know, so what do you think about this? You know, hey, is this something good? And I wanted to see what kind of energy he brought to it. And he was positive. I said, well, how are you helping your students? Well, you know, I believe that we can just do, and I was like, okay, he's a positive guy. And I was like, look, sign on the dotted line. We're going to collaborate. We're going to work on something together. It's even something that I think has grown into my leadership style. I just laugh because I know people are laughing at me because sometimes they think that I'm just nothing but positive energy. And it's like, no, you know, sometimes I get down on myself, but then I make sure I say, it's fine to be down for a moment. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, let's get going. And we can do these things. And so it is, when you do it enough over the years and years and years, you get better at it. You're not going to necessarily be perfect at it. And, you know, it takes a moment to think about yourself, to think about, you know, how am I? Am I a positive person? You know, do I think about things positively? Do I predict that good things are going to happen to me? And so it's kind of like a little self-assessment kind of thing that you do, because, you know, being a successful student, that's a piece of it. You know, you've got to have the persistence to study well and making sure that you do listen to what the professor says. But this other piece of it is really thinking about, how can I connect with other like minds? Because then you create an environment for yourself that helps lift you up just by being connected to them. And it's so funny because it sounds like a really soft kind of thing, but it makes a huge, huge difference. It has for me anyway.
Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of finding that group of like-minded people, and kind of like what traits are important for like working in a team and collaboration? You served on committees, you served in so many different groups. Right now, your job is definitely super collaborative. Can you talk about what is important for teamwork?
I feel like I've got it down to a science. And part of that science is that I try to give, you know, anybody who says that they want to work, or we're working on something in the same space, was, hey, we should collaborate together. And my first thought is, okay, so is this person serious? And I do the little test to see, you know, what kind of person are they? Are they positive? And that's one step. But then it's that, are they going to follow through? And I have lots of friends who they don't follow through, but when I want to get something done, or when I've got a specific project or goal, those aren't going to be the first person that I'm going to think about reaching out to. Because while I like them as a person, whatever the task is or whatever, it may be just that we're not aligned with one another. And so it's not like you know, throw away your friends or nothing like that. But, you know, when it comes to like writing papers, I'm full of stories. And so we're going to be very careful about that, Corbin. I can tell stories all day long. But I will tell you, when I was at Penn State, and then I went to Duke University to be a professor, and I was a full professor. And in my mind, I was like, you know something? I can't believe it. I'm actually a full professor. I haven't got anything more to achieve. I'm done, whatever. And I met this gentleman. His name is Chris Edwards. And we were like joking around saying, yeah, you know, when do you ever get to the point of thinking that you've made it? And I said, yeah, I'm fooling myself thinking that I think that I've made it, because I don't feel like I have now. And he and I used to write papers together, and they would not get accepted. And rather than, you know, beat ourselves up, oh, you know, maybe we should just throw in the towel, it was always funny. We would get on the phone and we'd laugh at each other, and we'd say, do you see that they rejected our paper? Hey, they don't know who they're running into. We're going to get that paper published. And we would always, I mean, out of the most horrible failures, we would always figure out some way to reframe, revise, resubmit, and we would get it done. It's people like that have an impact. I will never forget him. He has been a friend since that's 2006. I mean, 15 years, longer than that. Seems like it's longer than that. I mean, just such a good special friend for lots of other things, but also because we can work together, because we share that idea that failure happens. It's going to happen to you. And it's what you do with that failure that defines you and differentiates you maybe from other people. If you just roll up your tent and say, oh, it's just not going to work, that's what it'll end up happening. The one other story I would tell is that for my grants, I feel like I'm being very vulnerable here. So you guys, don't judge me. Don't judge me. I've had 3 really big grants. And for each one of those grants, it took me 3 submissions. It was no magic that I had the perfect idea. I had an idea that I thought was good, but it wasn't done in the right way. So I got some feedback and they were like, oh, Keith doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm like, oh, okay, well, we'll see. So I'd go back and I would revise it and I send it in again. They're like, well, it's better, but eh. And I'd like, look, you guys said the wrong thing. You said it was better, meaning I can make it even better. And then I'd make it better for the 3rd time. And I would get, I've had 3 major grants and that's where that's come from. But it is this way in which you look at people both for and enjoy them, but also be honest with yourself. I mean, if it's somebody who's negative, they're going to bring kind of negative energy into your space, into how you think about things, how you evaluate successes and failures. Successes too. That's when you have some of those negative people, it's that you succeed and then they're like, well, I guess you get lucky every now and then. It's like, why would you say that? You should just be celebrating we did something good. So it's making those kind of judgments of people. I mean, it's so different depending on who it is, but those are some examples.
Right now, and earlier you talked about, if you're not going to believe in yourself, who else is? Can you kind of, again, touch on being like a personal advocate? Like, how do you advocate for yourself, even if, you don't necessarily feel as confident? You're kind of struggling. How do you know, okay, I got this, like, I'm going to advocate for myself. I know I got this.
I don't know if I ever get there. It's not until like the day is won that I say that, hey, I'm sometimes surprised. I'm saying I got that. I'm so focused on just working really hard to get there. When I get there, it's like, wow, I got there. And then I look to something else to do. It's like, I spend a little bit of time celebrating and giving a little bit of pat on your back to say, something, you started off here and, there's a Drake song that says that we started off here and we got to there. I mean, it's the same kind of thing of that you take a moment to make sure you celebrate. And for me, I've just never been satisfied. And it's easy for me too. And this is, I guess, a takeaway of that because I love what I do. And it's an interesting story. I accomplished a lot of things at Duke and got some great things done. And then I went from Duke to Wayne State. And people asked me, they said, well, you can just use rankings. At schools, there's lots of good things about different kinds of schools, but there's just different kinds of schools. And they're like, well, why are you leaving Duke to go to Wayne State? And I said, because I achieved everything I needed to achieve there. But now what I really want to do is I care about students. And I want to see if I can make an impact on students in my little local area and do that. And this job, because at first too, I didn't even want the job. But I kind of got talked into it, and more I heard about it from the president there, I was like, this is the job for me. I can do really cool things here. And it's so funny with all of the work that I've done in research, this was a real job where I had a boss. And, when you're a faculty member, you kind of have a boss, but you kind of don't. I had a boss, and I always say that job was the hardest job I ever had, and it was the job I loved the best. And that was until I got this job, which is now the hardest job I've ever had, and the one that I love the best because it's still doing those things. So some people sometimes say that you can't just pursue your passions, but I think even as we talk about, evaluating your environment and figuring out, who's going to be, a good person to partner with to think about achieving goals. If you focus on the things that you're passionate about, you can't sometimes live on those alone, but it's very important to be passionate about what you're doing. And it's also important to focus on the things when you're not passionate about it. Like you're going to take some classes that you're like, oh, this is like the suckiest class I've ever taken. Tell you another story real quick. I had a class that was in thinking about the universe. Now, first I thought, how are we going to figure out everything about the universe in one semester? Then the class was at 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Oh, it was just like, it was horrible. And then they had it in a pink room. And pink is this calming color that, you know, will put you to sleep. They do it for babies. It's interesting stuff. So I had a really fun weekend, and I show up on Monday at 8 o'clock, and I'm leaning against this pole that's sitting next to my seat in the very back of the class on the right-hand side. Well, I started to fall asleep. But I realized that as I'm falling out of my chair, and I'm like, dude, you got two choices. You can either fall on your face or you can stand up. Well, the professor was not the most entertaining guy. He usually stood at the board and he faced the board, but he happened to be turned around and he was looking at me. So I stand up. Everybody in the class is like half asleep, but I stand up and it's the most exciting thing that's happened in the class. And the guy goes, well, Mr. Whitfield, do you have something to contribute? And I went, not right now. So I sat back down and there was a little bit of laughing. And I said to myself, hey, I'm not letting this happen again. I got to figure out a way to make this class that was just making my eyes bleed. It was so boring. But I started listening to it and I was like, hey, half the stuff this guy is saying is bullcrap. So I started raising my hand and I said, how does that have anything to do with this? Hey, well, good observation, Mr. Whitfield. That leads us to this. I went from an F to an A in that class. And it's like, you've got to find your purpose, even in those classes that you've either done it before or you think are really boring. If you can find purpose in the things that aren't directly connected, that benefits you too. It helps you to grow. It helps make your mind work in ways to think about and how to solve problems. And no matter what situation you're in, you can find, for me, I found joy in it. It was fun harassing the professor. I didn't harass him bad, but it was fun. So we've got to figure out ways to do that when we're in our classes, when we're interacting and doing this kind of stuff.
If you could go back to your first day of college and tell yourself any lessons that you had to learn the hard way, any pieces of advice, what would you tell yourself on the very first day of college?
I would lecture myself for a long time. I would tell myself a couple of times for school. I think in particular, one would be, don't sit in the back of the classroom. It's, you know, you hear it, it's a classic thing. I wanted to make sure that, you know, nobody asked me a question because I didn't want to, what is it, W.C. Fields used to say, it's better to be silent than to, you know, speak up and confirm that you don't know what the heck you're talking about. That's a summary. So I would sit in the back of the classes in part to kind of hide. And what I found, particularly once I went to graduate school, is that when I started sitting in the front of the class, it was expected that I knew what was going on because I must have been so bold to sit in the front of the class. And I couldn't be distracted because I was right there in front. And it was something about being closer to the action of what was happening in the class that to me was a really important thing for me to do. The other thing that I would say is that I would try to tell myself to be just as persistent, but to be more focused. Like I love learning about like anything, like almost anything is fascinating to me. There's a few things that are boring to me, but it's like anything that's fascinating to me. And again, it's that love for asking questions and to ask why, you know, so why is that? Or why did they do that? Or, you know, why do you think that is? Or why did that person just do that? I think I would have tried to focus myself a little bit more, although I can contradict myself and say that's what's made my career great, is that I've just done stuff that I was passionate about. I studied genetic stuff, cognition, health, and it took me a lot longer to become considered an expert because I would have one paper here and one paper here and one paper here rather than 3 papers in one area. But for me, it was fun and I was going to just do it even though I knew it was a little riskier proposition. I did what I love doing. And so that's probably something that I wouldn't have told myself to do differently. I just would have said, you know, maybe be a little more focused. I'd encourage myself to do that. And I don't know, other than that, I don't know if I have too many other lessons that I would tell younger Keith, because as many times as he screwed up, as many times as he kind of wandered off, um, they end up becoming who I am. And everything is not of value, but some of that's of real value to me. Of when I think about the things that I did, it's like, God, that was the dumbest thing. But you know something? If I didn't do that, I probably wouldn't do this. And so I put it together and am positive about the things that I did that weren't necessarily at the moment the best thing. There was a lot of those things that ultimately ended up becoming better for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Whitfield, for joining me today, for having this conversation. Thank you, everyone who tuned in.
Take care, everyone. Get ready for the fall semester. Great things are going to happen this fall, and can't wait to see you.